James C. McCroskey is a professor in the Department of Communication Studies at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. From 1972 to 1997, he served as chair of the Department of Communication Studies at West Virginia University. Prior to joining the faculty at the University of Alabama at Birmingham in 2006, he held positions at Illinois State University, Michigan State University, Pennsylvania State University, Old Dominion University, and the University of Hawaii. He also taught high school speech and coach debate in Scotland and Watertown, South Dakota. Dr. McCroskey's research and teaching interests have varied over his career, but he is most known for his work in credibility, communication apprehension, instructional communication, and most recently, communibiology. His devotion to programmatic research and the social scientific approach to scholarship has been evident in all of his research programs. Dr. McCroskey is the most published scholar in the field of human communication to date. His first book, An Introduction to Rhetorical Communication, originally published in 1968 and now in its 9th edition, is now one of the oldest continuously published books in the field. Dr. McCroskey has received the Robert J. Kibler Memorial Award from the National Communication Association and Distinguished Service Awards from the Eastern Communication Association and the World Communication Association. He has edited Human Communication Research, Communication Education, and Communication Research Reports. Dr. McCroskey is consistently ranked as the most prolific scholar in communication studies, with well over 200 peer-reviewed articles and published more than 80 plus textbooks. Please welcome Dr. James C. McCroskey. So let's get started with the first question. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, you took an interest in what was then referred to as either stage fright or reticence. What made you originally interested in investigating in this area?
Well, there were two areas there. One went back into history, and the whole history of the communication field, about up until the 1950s at least, and some maybe into the 60s. The stage fright was, also was called public speaking anxiety. That was all. Everything was about giving speeches. Reticence was a deviation from that, and essentially they were looking at the very, very, very few people who were doing anything other than stage fright. Were looking at these people in their classes that didn't want to talk, and that wound up being way down the path was willingness to communicate. And Jerry Phillips from Penn State was one of those people that was way out there ahead of the rest of us with reticence. And I was asked by him, as were all the other doctoral students who were teaching public speaking, to send him the ones that were afraid to talk. Well, no, we didn't follow the orders very well. Anybody that seemed strange in the class, we sent to his class. And at one point, I offered to help him develop a measure for reticence, because he didn't have one. And he actually, our offices were next door to one another. And he said something that I probably can't quote directly, but something to the effect of he didn't need any blankety blank measure. He knew one when he saw one. So that's why he never did get a measuring instrument. And so, my attitude was, if you can't measure it, you really don't know what in the heck it is. And I just looked at it as something that didn't count. But I had a phone call one evening from the psych, not department, but the group that works with students who have problems. and asked me if this student was in my public speaking class. And I said yes. And but does she have a speech to give tomorrow, which would have been Tuesday? And I said, yeah, she could be, or else she is on Thursday. And then I got curious and asked, why are you calling? And he said, well, we just got her off the top of this building over here. She was going to jump. It's a 13-story building, I believe. And she said she couldn't face another giving another speech. That got my attention. And after that, I was quite sensitive to the idea that some of these kids were really screwed up, from the orientation that all of us public speaking teachers had in those days. And but I went ahead and finished my degree and got to Michigan State. It was my first job after my PhD. Of course, it was a DED, as you know. And we found we had quite a few people there, too, that seemed to be very anxious. And we also got a lot of, both at Penn State and at Michigan State, a lot of students did not want to take the public speaking class, but it was required of all students. One of the things that we did was to, after this, what I call it the almost death of a student, and we found out that at Penn State, there had been 13 suicides in about a 3 or 4 year period. And Phillips and I were able to get the data from the university that all but one of the 13 students that committed suicide were currently in the public speaking class. And that scared him and me. But we didn't know what to do about it. When I got to Michigan State, I had a graduate student who, from the Ed Psych department, that they were using a measuring instrument to measure speech anxiety. And that's really how I got into it. That they were only measuring the public speaking component and weren't looking at those other students. And I figured those students that had the most problem were not the ones that had public speaking anxiety, but we just didn't know what it all was. And that's how we got going.
So this ultimately led you to developing the early measures for looking at communication apprehension.
That's right. We didn't really know how to do it yet. So our first few were mostly public speaking anxiety measures, and we'd had those since the 1930s. But after a while, we finally figured out how to do it right. We had a lot of critics who told us how to do it, and actually one of them was right.
So how do you now define communication apprehension?
Well, with what we've used since the 1970s, one definition, and it's an individual's level of fear or anxiety associated with either real or anticipated communication with another person or persons.
Can you tell us a little bit about that definition?
Well, what it says is now fear and anxiety there was a disagreement that was going on in the field of psychology at that time about fear and anxiety being the same thing or being different things. And we went along with the idea that they probably were different things. And we didn't know how they were, so we just put them in the definition.
Okay.
And then it was many people we noticed they didn't have to actually be in a speaking situation to be anxious. All they had to do was be mentioned that they were going to be in a communication situation. That's why we put that in. And then, of course, we figured this was either one-on-one or one-on however many. That's why the person or persons part of the definition.
Now, the most commonly used measure of communication apprehension is your personal report of Communication Apprehension 24, which
Yes,
measures four different contexts.
right.
How did you
hmm
come up with those four contexts?
Well, we started out with a very large number of contexts, and 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 we got items, uh, like I'm afraid when, and then we put those situations, and we had, if I remember right, we had 80 items, and then we factor analyzed those, and we came down to four, and that's how we decided what they were. So it was the four bases were based on the factor analysis data.
So, we've now been looking at 40 years now of research in communication apprehension. What have
Seems
we
like yesterday.
So what have we learned about the general causes of communication apprehension in that 40-year period?
Well, we knew for sure for the first 30 of those years that communication apprehension was learned. Unfortunately, we had learned that and it's not correct. We didn't realize it for a long time. We developed several methods of measuring, in the various approach of the PRCA, and we developed treatment programs. And we had our first one was very, very successful, and we replicated it in another environment and got the same results. And so we were really confident that we knew what we were doing. Well, after about 25 of the years, we were just happy with this because it was highly statistically significant. And we realized that we're not accounting for much variance. Generally, with potential for 100%, we were getting, in our best research, we were getting somewhere around 6 to 8%. And Michael Beatty and I recognized this at about the same time, and we said something's dreadfully wrong here, that we are not really able to do much in terms of reducing people's communication apprehension. And we one evening decided we were going to figure this out, and we talked and talked and talked and argued and argued and argued, and neither one of us remembers which. One of us said, "Well, what's the opposite?" And so, well, the opposite, of course, is genetics. And we said, well, maybe this is it. And for the next few years, we tried to develop methods to determine this. We got an awful lot of data from the field of psychology, and we started to understand that the genetics is probably a factor. And so we did research, and we found out that it wasn't just probably, it was absolutely, definitely genetic. That doesn't mean that that genetics is the only thing that is involved, but it's the primary thing.
So, based on that, then, what now do we have as possible treatments to help people who have these really high levels of communication apprehension?
Well, we don't really have anything more than we had 40 years ago, or 30 years ago, I should say. Those programs are helpful, not to the degree that we would like, and the when something is genetic, you have to. How do you change that? You don't with the kinds of treatment programs that we have available. There's some drugs that have been found that help people for a brief period of time. But these drugs are dangerous if you have to take them every day or several times every day. And so that's not a feasible approach. You can, of course, change genes, but that's, make the gene change or have different changes, but this is way beyond the field of communication. And until 1990, people weren't even able to study human brains without killing the person. So that wasn't done. So we've only had less than 20 years for the brain people to get to where they are now, so that we can understand what elements are probably going on. And now today, there's research that is going on, some of it in the communication field, where we're trying to find out what it is in the brain that generates communication apprehension. We anticipate that we'll be able to do that before too long, but we have been held back because of the inability to really study brains until so recently.
So over this 40-year period, you've done a lot of research looking at how communication apprehension is exhibited in a wide variety of different communication contexts. For example, you've looked at communication apprehension in interpersonal relationships and in education and organizations. What are just a sampling of the results that you've seen and how a person's level of communication apprehension affects them in all these different communication contexts?
Well, what we have found is that in all the contexts that people have done the research, it's just so clear-cut. Everything is the same. The high apprehensive is apprehensive in everything. There are other people who are not high apprehensives that are anxious about some communication contexts, but not with others. For example, some people have no fear of public speaking, but they can't handle a one-on-one communication. And of course, the opposite is true. They can have everyday communication life, no problem. Having to give a speech, it's a major problem. So it's one of those things that the research has turned up, is that there are people who are anxious in all of these different kinds of contexts, or they may be in just one or two or several, and the results are always the same. The higher the apprehension, the worse the outcome for that communicator.
Now, you recently published the third edition of Avoiding Communication, Shyness, Reticence, and Communication Apprehension with Hampton Press. How has your understanding of communication apprehension as a field changed in the last 40 years?
Well, I think that for the most of that period, we were trying to figure out what was going on, and we had some dead ends. And then, we got to the genetics, and everything just kind of got clear. This is a big problem. About 1 person in 5 in the U.S. society are high apprehensives. And these people generally just don't have as good a life as people that are lower in apprehension.
So where do you think communication apprehension research is going to go in the next decade?
Well, I'm quite certain that there's going to be, many studies like we've had before, but I think the key ones will be with the genetic issue.
We've been talking to Dr. James C. McCroskey about his research over a 40-year period in communication apprehension. CommuniCast is a production of the Communication and Media Department at SUNY